Good morning. It is Friday, the 25th of November. Ooh, it's a month to Christmas. We continue looking at the book of the prophet Zechariah. And in today's reading from chapter 14, verses 1 to 11, Zechariah describes that terrible day of the Lord. And it's interesting because it begins in verse 1 with the destruction and the plunder of the city of Jerusalem. And there is great turmoil and suffering from all the inhabitants. And then the Lord appears. And when he does so, it is a great and terrible day. And his people, the people of God, are saved and the enemies are destroyed. But firstly, it's interesting to note how, again, this coming of the Lord appears from us, and the way it is written, to be, and I use this word in inverted commas, delayed, perhaps from our perspective only. But again, it raises this prospect that we have spoken of before, that God's timing and our timing do not necessarily mesh as neatly and as tightly as we might like to think. So it's interesting to note that God will come when God will come. And in the meantime, there could well be great suffering and turmoil. Is this part of the consequence of the sinfulness of the people and of the nation? And it's part of the price, as it were, part of the consequence that they must bear? We're not too sure. But what is significant is that God will come, and we must hold on to that. God is well aware of what's happening, and God will come when God will come. And it's not for us to dictate to God when he should be there, although our human nature tends to want God to operate a lot more quickly. Instantaneously would be wonderful when things start going a little wrong in our lives. What is significant is that there's a great event. There is the event of the physical, this earthquake that appears. God is depicted as standing on the Mount of Olives, which is higher than the Temple Mount by the scripture I read, put it at about 200 feet. I'm not too sure how much that is in meters. Higher than the Temple Mount. God stands on the Mount of Olives. It is split in half. The sky goes dark and water begins to flow. Half the water flowing to the Dead Sea and half flowing to the Mediterranean. Jerusalem is rebuilt and lifted up, never again to be attacked and demolished. So very much apocalyptic writing again, and again with the question of apocalyptic writing, to what extent do we read it and interpret it precisely as it is written, or do we have to read it with a degree of wisdom and intelligence and a little bit of guesswork? Because perhaps there's a sense in which some of the apocalyptic writing says and means exactly what it says, but others is meant to be interpreted because it's a little bit, I'm not too sure quite what the right word is to use. It's symbolic of what could or will happen. But either way, when God comes, it is dramatic. When God comes and he fights on our side, that's it. We're going to win and everyone else will lose. And so how that day will happen and when that day will happen, and even whether this writing has already happened for Jerusalem, because there have been events when Jerusalem was destroyed, no earthquakes and dark days, but again, if those are symbolic, then they could well be interpreted differently. So again, we don't know, just as we don't know the timing of God, but what we do know is that God will come. God is supreme. He is Lord of lords and King of kings. No one can stand in his presence, and no one can defeat him, not even come close to that. And so let us hold faith and remain true to our God and remain obedient and righteous in all that we do. Folks, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll chat again next week. God bless.